In the state Senate, it was very close, as you and I have talked about before on this very program. And it was down to a few swing votes. In the end, a total of 5 Democrat state senators switched their position. Previously, they had been supportive of the death penalty, and all 5 switched. So that's how they came up with a 20-16 vote in the state Senate for repeal. The vote wasn't as close in the House, but we had our debate this past Wednesday. It was about 9 hours, and we ran a bunch of amendments. Our side did. The one I think that made the most sense is, why not have this question go to the people? Why not have there be a statewide referendum so the people can weigh in? Because we know, Tom, that a strong majority of the people of Connecticut, certainly in my district as well, but a strong majority of the people of Connecticut and the country support a death penalty for those despicable, heinous crimes that are just so awful that the only just penalty is the death penalty. House Minority Leader Larry Cafaro said it best on the floor, and he was very articulate and very passionate and spoke at length during the debate this past Wednesday about the hypocrisy of that notion. You remember during the election for governor, Daniel Malloy, in his debate with Tom Foley in October of 2010, when asked about the death penalty, he guaranteed that the people on death row and the Cheshire killers, if they were convicted, because at the time those trials were about to start, that they would get the death penalty and they would in fact be executed. He said, I guarantee it. And then he said he thinks that there should be no death penalty afterwards. I mean, we were talking about such a serious issue, so heavy, so serious, so important of an issue, that you're either for it or you're against it. How could you say, I'm for it for these guys, but then let's get rid of it? And so we saw a lot of discussion. I spoke about that part too on the floor of the House, because I could see if you're against the death penalty for moral or religious reasons, there actually would be nothing I could say to argue about that. But to say that I want it for the Cheshire killers, but then afterwards let's get rid of it, I think is a fraud. By operation of law, these guys who are on death row in Connecticut, their sentences would be, in effect, commuted to life without parole by operation of law. Of course, if we got rid of the death penalty, that's what's going to happen. And remember, these guys on death row, they're bad guys. They committed horrific crimes. Does anybody seriously doubt whether we got the right guys in the Cheshire case? Of course we got the right guys. Now, they blamed each other, but the fact of the matter is they're both guilty of probably the most horrific crime ever committed in Connecticut history. And the other 9 people who are on death row, they themselves don't even claim that they're innocent. In their appeal paperwork, none of them say that they're innocent. The governor hasn't signed it yet. He said that he would. He thinks it's a prospective bill. Some legislators hung their hat on this idea that it's prospective, meaning going forward, meaning it's only going to affect people in the future and not the current 11. And it's not going to affect the Cheshire guys, the killers. But of course it's going to affect the Cheshire killers. In other words, they're not going to have an execution. They will go to life without parole.
Do you have any other examples of the state where it has changed a law but did not change the existing sentences for people? Has that ever happened before?
Well, you have the exact same situation in New Mexico that we're talking about. And courts are going to rule on this. But,
So it's not happened yet in Connecticut?
It has. No, we don't have a direct on-point precedent. But think about it. Do you really think that an appeals court was ever going to uphold a death sentence in Connecticut when the law itself has been outlawed, when it's been prohibited? Of course they're not going to. I mean, currently, Tom, you and I have talked about this. We should have a death penalty, and it should be a working death penalty, where there's a limit, some reasonable limit to the appeals.
Right.
7 to 10 years is what we propose, based on the Virginia model. There's a Florida model. Other states have a working death penalty. Currently, before we repealed the death penalty, when it's about to be repealed, if the governor does sign the law this week, a person can appeal literally for the rest of their life. So given the fact that they can file appeal, actually what's called a habeas corpus petition, they can appeal over and over and over and over. Well, if you add the fact that all of a sudden the death penalty has been repealed, of course they're never going to be executed. And to say otherwise is just a fraud on the public. It's a false argument on the proponents of repeal's behalf to say that, because of course if you have to house these prisoners for the rest of their lives, of course it's going to cost more money than if you were to execute them. And this idea that we save money on appeals, that's not true either, Tom, because all you're doing is changing the punishment. When you change the punishment from death penalty to life without parole, if the maximum is suddenly life without parole, as it will be once the governor signs this, well, the people who were accused of that particular crime are going to defend themselves and appeal just as vigorously as they did before. So we're not going to save anything from the appeals process. Of course we're not. It's going to cost more money to repeal the death penalty, not less. And that's obvious.
How much does it cost per year to house these guys for? I mean, obviously it depends on what their age is, but what does it cost, per year on average?
I would say roughly $35,000. I mean, the different figures are floating around, but it depends on whether you talk about different labor costs and versus the actual brick and mortar.